I checked the battery indicator on my camera for the third time in 10 minutes, watching the red numbers bounce as Leon's pickup hit another pothole. 15 years of making documentaries about forgotten corners of America, and I still got the same nervous energy before stepping into a new story. The difference this time was the weight of Leon's warning settling in my gut like bad coffee. The camera case slid against my leg as we took another sharp turn. I'd packed light for this trip, just the essentials. 1 camera body, 2 lenses, extra batteries, memory cards. Jonathan had the sound equipment spread across the seat beside him, checking levels on the digital recorder with the methodical precision that made him the best cameraman I'd ever worked with. We'd been a team for 8 years now, long enough that I could read his moods and the way he handled his gear. Right now, he looked skeptical. "You sure about this place?" Jonathan asked Leon, raising his voice over the engine noise. Leon's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. The man had been guiding hunters and hikers through these mountains for decades, but something about this particular destination had him on edge. He'd mentioned it 3 times already, how this wasn't just some backwoods community trying to stay off the grid. Something was wrong with it, he kept saying. Wrong in a way that made his voice drop to almost a whisper. I studied Leon's profile as he navigated another switchback. The scar on his right forearm caught the afternoon light filtering through the windshield. He'd gotten that from a bear trap, he'd told us, back when he was younger and less careful about where he stepped. Now he moved through these mountains like he knew every root and rock personally. If Leon Kennedy was nervous about a place, that meant something. But I'd heard variations of this story before. Small communities that had chosen isolation, that viewed outsiders with suspicion. Local guides who played up the mystery to make their services seem more valuable. Part of the job was learning to separate genuine concern from folklore and local color. Jonathan understood this too. When he caught my eye in the side mirror, his expression said what we were both thinking. We'd evaluate the situation ourselves. The road had been deteriorating for the last hour. What started as cracked asphalt had given way to gravel, then dirt, then this rutted track that seemed to exist more by habit than design. Trees pressed close on both sides, their branches occasionally scraping against the truck's roof. The GPS on my phone had lost signal 20 minutes ago, leaving us entirely dependent on Leon's knowledge of these mountains. I thought about the research I'd done before this trip. Official records for this area were sparse. A few census entries from the 1930s, some geological surveys, property deeds that traced back to land grants from the 1800s. No recent documentation, no internet presence, no social media footprint. In today's connected world, that level of invisibility required either extreme poverty or deliberate effort. Both possibilities made for compelling documentary material. The truck's engine strained as we climbed another steep section. Leon downshifted and I could hear loose gravel pinging against the undercarriage. Through the trees, I caught glimpses of the valley below. Patches of cleared land, what might have been cultivated fields, the suggestion of human habitation hidden among the forest. "How much further?" I asked. "Just over this ridge," Leon replied. His accent carried the particular cadence of these mountains, vowels stretched and consonants softened by generations of isolation. "But I'm telling you both again, this ain't like other places. People there, they don't act right. Haven't for years." Jonathan was testing the wireless microphone connection, watching signal strength bars on his receiver. "Define don't act right," he said, without looking up. Leon was quiet for a long moment. The truck crested the ridge, and suddenly the valley opened below us. "You'll see," he said. I leaned forward to get a better view through the windshield. The village spread across the narrow valley floor like something from a different century. Wooden structures clustered around what appeared to be a central area. Houses, barns, outbuildings constructed from local timber and arranged without any obvious plan. Smoke rose from several chimneys, thin gray columns dissipating in the still air. What struck me immediately was the absence of modern infrastructure. No power lines, no satellite dishes, no paved roads or streetlights. Even the most isolated communities I documented usually showed some connection to the contemporary world. This place looked like it had been frozen in time. The road down into the valley was barely wide enough for the truck. Leon took it slowly, navigating between trees and around boulders that had probably been obstacles since the road was first carved. I kept my camera ready, though I knew better than to start filming before we'd establish some kind of rapport with the locals. First impressions mattered in this work. Show up with a camera rolling, and you might as well announce that you were there to exploit them. As we descended, I could make out more details. Gardens and small fields, some with crops I couldn't identify from this distance. Livestock, chickens, maybe goats. People moving between buildings, though they were too far away to distinguish clearly. The architecture was utilitarian but solid, built to last. These weren't temporary structures or poverty housing. Someone had put real effort into creating a sustainable community here. Population? I asked Leon. Maybe 60, 70 people. Hard to say exactly. That was smaller than I'd expected, but it made sense given the isolation. Large communities required more resources, more contact with the outside world. A group this size could theoretically be self-sufficient if they had the right skills and enough arable land. The truck bounced through a particularly deep rut, and Jonathan steadied his equipment case. "Any particular reason they chose this spot?" he asked. Leon's jaw tightened. Story goes back to the 1800s. Religious group, wanted to get away from the world, found this valley and decided it was perfect for their purposes. Religious communities seeking isolation weren't uncommon in Appalachian history. I'd documented similar groups before, some thriving, some struggling, all dealing with the tension between preservation of their beliefs and the practical necessities of modern life. What made this community interesting was how completely they seemed to have withdrawn. Most isolated religious groups still maintained some contact with the outside world. If only for medical emergencies or essential supplies they couldn't produce themselves. We reached the valley floor, and Leon pulled the truck to a stop near what looked like the village edge. A few buildings were visible through the trees, but the main settlement was still hidden from view. The silence after he cut the engine was profound. No traffic noise, no machinery, just the sound of wind through leaves and distant bird calls. I opened my door and stepped out, immediately struck by the quality of the air, clean and thin, with the particular freshness that came from altitude and isolation. The temperature was cooler than I'd expected, despite the season. These mountains created their own microclimate. Jonathan was already unloading his equipment, moving with the efficient economy of motion that came from years of practice. He'd worked with me long enough to know the routine, establish base camp, assess the situation, make contact carefully, never rush the initial approach. I shouldered my camera bag and looked around. The trees here were old growth, the kind of forest that suggested this area had been largely undisturbed for decades. Between the trunks, I could see glimpses of the village proper, wooden walls, tin roofs, the movement of people going about their daily business. Leon climbed out of the truck but stayed close to the driver's door, like he was ready to leave at any moment. His nervousness was more pronounced now that we'd arrived. Whatever had happened during his previous visits to this place, it had left him genuinely unsettled. "We should introduce ourselves to whoever's in charge," I said, checking that my camera was easily accessible but not obviously displayed. "Is there a community leader? Mayor? Elder?" "They don't really work that way," Leon said. "People just are. You'll understand when you meet them." That was cryptic enough to be either meaningless or significant. I'd learned to pay attention to the things I pulled the camera away from my face, the viewfinder suddenly feeling too small, too confining. The woman continued her spinning motion, arms extended as if she held something precious, something that required careful attention. Her movements were fluid, practiced, the kind of muscle memory that came from years of repetition. but there was nothing there. No thread, no wheel, no actual work being accomplished. When I'd first raised the camera, I thought maybe the angle was wrong, that I couldn't see what she was working with from my position. People in isolated communities often had tools or methods that looked unfamiliar to outsiders, but through the viewfinder, with the lens focused directly on her hands, there was no mistaking it. Her fingers moved with precision around empty air. The moment our eyes met through the camera, she smiled. Not the startled reaction I expected from someone caught off guard by a stranger with a camera, but a knowing smile, like she'd been waiting for me to notice her. Like this whole performance had been for my benefit. She held my gaze for what felt like several seconds, that smile never wavering, before returning to her phantom work as if nothing had happened. I lowered the camera completely, letting it hang from the strap around my neck. My hands felt unsteady, though I couldn't pinpoint exactly why. I'd filmed plenty of unusual situations over the years, people doing things that seemed strange or inexplicable until you understood the context. But this felt different. This felt deliberate in a way that made my skin crawl. Jonathan was watching me. I could see it in my peripheral vision. He had that expression he got when he was trying to read a situation, figure out whether we were dealing with something interesting or something problematic. After 8 years of working together, he'd gotten good at reading the subtle shifts in my demeanor, the difference between professional curiosity and genuine unease. I caught his eye and motioned for us to keep moving. Whatever was happening here, standing and staring wasn't going to give us answers. We needed to see more, talk to people, get some kind of baseline for what normal looked like in this place before we could understand what we'd just witnessed. We walked deeper into the village, following what appeared to be the main road. The path was hard-packed dirt, worn smooth by years of foot traffic, with wooden buildings clustered on either side. Most of the structures looked well-maintained despite their age, with fresh patches of wood here and there where repairs had been made. Gardens grew beside several houses, though I couldn't identify most of the plants. The whole place had an orderly, lived-in quality that suggested a functioning community. But as we walked, I started noticing more things that didn't make sense. A man stood beside a pile of split logs, axe raised above his head. I watched him bring it down in a smooth, powerful arc, the kind of motion that should have sent wood chips flying. But the blade stopped just short of the log, never making contact. He straightened, adjusted his grip, and repeated the motion. Again, the axe stopped short. He'd been doing this when we first walked past, and he continued doing it as we moved down the road, each swing identical to the last. Children played in a small, cleared area between houses, their laughter carrying across the village with an odd echo that seemed to bounce off the mountains longer than it should have. They ran in circles, tossed things back and forth, played what looked like tag or some variation of it, but like the woman with her spinning. There was nothing there. No ball being thrown, no toys being shared, no actual games being played. Just the motions, the sounds, the social interactions built around empty air. Every person we passed had the same quality of focused attention, as if they were completely absorbed in important work. None of them looked directly at us, but I could feel their awareness, the way their postures shifted slightly as we approached, the pause in their movements that suggested they were tracking our progress even while pretending to ignore us. I tried to approach a woman who was hanging laundry on a line stretched between two posts. She moved with the same careful precision I'd seen from the others, shaking out garments and pinning them in place. But when I got close enough to see clearly, there were no clothes in her hands, no actual laundry being hung, just the motions performed with complete seriousness. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice friendly and non-threatening. "I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I was hoping to ask you some questions about your community." She continued her work as if I hadn't spoken. I moved closer, tried again. Still nothing. It wasn't that she was being rude or dismissive. She genuinely seemed not to hear me, as if I wasn't there at all. I looked back at Jonathan and Leon, both of whom had stopped a few feet away to watch the interaction. Jonathan shrugged, but Leon's expression was grim. This was what he'd been trying to warn us about, I realized. This was why he'd been so reluctant to bring us here. I tried approaching 2 more people with similar results. A man repairing what appeared to be a fence, though I couldn't see any actual damage or replacement materials. An elderly woman sweeping her front steps with a broom that never seemed to pick up any dirt. Both of them ignored me completely, not even acknowledging my presence when I spoke directly to them. The frustration was building in my chest, a familiar tension that came with interviews that weren't working, stories that weren't cooperating. I'd spent years learning how to connect with people, how to put them at ease and get them talking. But these people weren't nervous, or suspicious, or protective of their privacy. They simply acted as if I didn't exist. I was starting to wonder if we'd have to leave empty-handed, if this whole trip would turn out to be a waste of time and money, when Jonathan tapped my shoulder. "Look," he said quietly, pointing toward a small house at the edge of the main cluster of buildings. A wooden swing hung from the porch roof, suspended by 2 thick ropes that looked new and well-maintained. A girl sat on the swing, maybe 8 years old, with long dark hair that caught the light filtering through the trees. She wore a simple dress, pale blue with small flowers printed on the fabric, and her feet didn't quite reach the ground. The swing moved in a steady rhythm, back and forth, a perfect pendulum motion that never varied in speed or distance. But the girl wasn't pushing with her feet, wasn't pumping her legs to maintain momentum. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, while the swing continued its mechanical motion. I watched for at least 30 seconds, timing the rhythm in my head. Every swing was identical. The same arc, the same speed, the same gentle creak from the ropes. No external force that I could see, no one pushing her, no wind strong enough to maintain that kind of consistent movement. "How long has she been doing that?" I asked Leon. He was standing a few steps behind us, hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets. "Don't know. She's always on that swing when I come through here." "Always?" "Every time. Same spot, same motion." He paused, watching the girl with an expression I couldn't quite read. Never seen her anywhere else in the village. I raised my camera again, adjusting the focus to frame the swing and the girl. Through the viewfinder, the motion looked even more unnatural, more mechanical, like watching a piece of clockwork designed to mimic human movement. The girl's face was calm, almost serene, but there was something about her stillness that felt wrong. Children didn't sit that motionless, didn't maintain that kind of perfect posture while swinging. As I watched through the lens, she turned her head slowly in our direction. Her eyes found the camera, found me behind it, and she smiled the same knowing smile I'd seen from the woman with the invisible spinning wheel. I pressed the record button and brought the camera back up to my face. The girl continued her perfect pendulum motion, that serene expression unchanged. Through the viewfinder, everything looked normal at first, just a child on a swing, the way it should be. I adjusted the focus ring, trying to get a cleaner shot of her face. That's when it started. The changes were subtle at first, like my eyes were playing tricks on me. Her skin seemed to shimmer, then darken in places. I blinked hard, thinking maybe the lens was dirty or the lighting was off. But when I looked again, thin black lines were spreading across her cheeks like hairline fractures in ceramic. They branched out from the corners of her eyes, delicate at first, then growing thicker and more pronounced. I held my breath and kept filming. The lines weren't shadows or tricks of light. They were actually there, visible through the camera, but somehow not with my naked eyes when I'd looked at her moments before. The cracks spread down her neck, disappearing under the collar of her pale blue dress, then reappearing along her hands where they rested in her lap. Her smile began to change too. What had been a normal child's expression started stretching wider, the corners of her mouth pulling back farther than any human mouth should go. The lips seemed to thin out as they extended, revealing teeth that looked too white, too sharp. The smile kept growing until it nearly reached her ears, turning her face into something that belonged in a nightmare. But it was her eyes that made my hands start shaking. They were darkening, the irises bleeding into the whites until there was nothing left but two black voids staring directly into my lens. Not just looking in my general direction, staring straight into the camera with an intensity that made me feel like she could see through the viewfinder and into my soul. The empty sockets seemed to pull at something inside me, like they were trying to draw me in. I jerked the camera away from my face so fast I nearly dropped it. My hands were trembling as I let it hang from the neck strap, and I could feel sweat beading on my forehead, despite the cool mountain air. The camera felt heavier than it should, like it had absorbed something from what I'd just seen. When I looked at the girl with my own eyes, no lens between us, she was completely normal again. Same serene expression, same gentle swing motion, same pale blue dress with tiny flowers. She was even humming softly to herself, a simple melody that drifted across the clearing like any child might make while playing. There were no black lines on her skin, no impossible smile, no void-like eyes, just a regular 8-year-old girl enjoying a swing in her front yard. But I knew what I'd seen through that camera. The memory was burned into my mind. Those spreading cracks, that grotesque smile, those empty eye sockets staring back at me. My rational brain tried to explain it away. Maybe the camera had malfunctioned. Maybe the light had been weird. Maybe I'd been staring through the viewfinder too long, and my eyes had started creating patterns that weren't there. Except it had felt too real, too detailed, too specific to be a hallucination or equipment failure. The way those cracks had spread across her skin had followed a pattern, like they were following some internal structure. The smile had moved with deliberate precision, not the random distortion of a glitchy camera. And those eyes, the way they'd focused on me, had been unmistakably intentional. "What's wrong?" Jonathan's voice made me jump. I turned to find him watching me with concern, his sound equipment lowered. He'd been monitoring audio levels while I filmed, but clearly my reaction had been obvious enough to pull his attention away from his work. "Did you see that?" I asked, then immediately realized how stupid the question was. If he'd seen what I'd seen, he would have reacted too. "See what? You just went white as a sheet and yanked the camera away like it bit you." I looked back at the girl. She was still swinging normally, still humming her little tune. How could I explain what had happened? That I'd seen her face turn into something from a horror movie, but only through the camera lens? Jonathan would think I was losing my mind. Hell, maybe I was losing my mind. "I thought I saw..." I started, then stopped. What could I say that wouldn't sound completely insane? The focus was acting weird. Thought maybe there was something wrong with the lens. Jonathan frowned and stepped closer. "You want me to take a look at it? Sometimes the autofocus can get confused in this kind of lighting." "No, it's fine now." I raised the camera again, keeping it away from my face. The LCD screen on the back showed the girl swinging normally. No cracks, no impossible smile, no void eyes. Just a child being a child. But I couldn't bring myself to look through the viewfinder again. Not yet. We spent the rest of the afternoon moving through the village, documenting what we could. I kept the camera at arm's length, using the LCD screen instead of the viewfinder, telling myself it was to avoid camera shake. Jonathan didn't question it, but I caught him glancing at me periodically with that look he got when he was trying to figure out if I was holding something back. The villagers continued their strange pantomime activities. We filmed the woman with her invisible spinning wheel, the man chopping phantom wood, the children playing games with toys that didn't exist. Through the LCD screen, everything looked exactly as it appeared to our naked eyes. Odd and inexplicable, but not terrifying. But as the afternoon wore on, a growing dread settled in my stomach. because I was starting to realize that what I'd seen through the viewfinder with the girl might not have been an isolated incident. The way that woman had smiled at me when we'd first arrived, that knowing expression that had made my skin crawl. What would she look like through the camera lens? What about the man with the axe, or the children playing their invisible games? The camera was showing me something hidden beneath the surface of this place, beneath the facade of quaint, rural simplicity. The villagers weren't just eccentric or following unusual customs. There was something fundamentally wrong here, something that could only be seen through the lens. I thought about all the documentary work I'd done over the years, all the communities I'd visited and filmed. I'd always prided myself on seeing through surfaces, on finding the real story beneath the obvious one. But I'd never encountered anything like this, a place where the camera itself seemed to reveal a completely different reality than what my eyes could see. The girl was still on her swing when we finished filming for the day, still maintaining that perfect pendulum motion, still humming her soft melody. She hadn't acknowledged us once during the entire afternoon, hadn't even glanced in our direction after that moment when she'd stared into my camera lens. But I could feel her awareness of us like a weight pressing against my back. Even when I wasn't looking at her, I knew she was there, knew she was somehow watching. The camera hanging around my neck felt heavier with each passing hour, like it was carrying more than just the afternoon's footage. As we packed up our equipment, I made a decision. Tonight, back at our campsite, I was going to review everything we'd shot. I was going to look at every frame, study every detail, and figure out what the camera was really showing me. Because whatever was happening in this village, whatever lay beneath the surface of these people's strange behaviors, the camera was the key to seeing it. The truth was there, hidden in the footage. I just had to be brave enough to look. The last of the daylight was fading behind the mountains when we finally started walking back toward the truck. My legs felt heavy, not from the hiking, but from carrying the weight of what I'd seen through that viewfinder all afternoon. The camera bounced against my chest with each step, and I found myself hyper-aware of its presence. Every bounce reminded me of what it had shown me, what it might show me again. Jonathan walked beside me, periodically adjusting the audio equipment slung over his shoulder. He'd been throwing me concerned looks all day, ever since I'd jerked the camera away from the girl on the swing. I couldn't blame him. One minute I was filming normally, the next I was pale and shaking like I'd seen a ghost. Which, in a way, maybe I had. The village felt different as we walked through it again. The same people were still there, still performing their strange pantomimes with invisible objects. The woman was still spinning nothing into thread. The man was still chopping wood that wasn't there. The children were still playing games with toys that didn't exist. But now I knew something else was happening beneath the surface, something the camera could see that my eyes couldn't. I kept the camera hanging from its strap, not daring to raise it again. The LCD screen had shown me normal people doing odd things, but the viewfinder had revealed something else entirely. Those black cracks spreading across the girl's face, her smile stretching impossibly wide, her eyes becoming dark voids. The memory made my hands want to shake again. Leon walked ahead of us, his relief obvious in the way his shoulders had relaxed. He'd been tense all day, watching the villagers with the wariness of someone who knew they weren't quite right. But he didn't know what I knew. He didn't know what the camera had shown me. Part of me wondered if I should tell him, but what would I say? That my camera revealed monsters hiding behind human faces? That sounded crazy, even to me. The dirt road crunched softly under our boots. The evening air was getting cooler, carrying the scent of wood smoke from the chimneys, and something else I couldn't identify. Something organic and earthy that made me think of things growing in dark places. The mountains loomed around us, their peaks already lost in shadow, making the valley feel enclosed and isolated from the rest of the world. We passed the house where the girl had been swinging all day. I couldn't help but glance over. half expecting to see her still there, still maintaining that perfect pendulum motion. But the porch was empty now, the swing hanging motionless from its ropes. The absence should have been a relief, but instead it made me more nervous. Where had she gone? Was she watching us from inside the house, those black void eyes tracking our movement? I forced myself to look ahead, focusing on Leon's back and the path to the truck. We were almost out of here, almost back to normal, whatever normal meant after today. That's when I saw him. A man stood in the road ahead of us, directly in our path. He hadn't been there a moment ago. I was sure of that. The road had been empty, and now suddenly there was a figure blocking our way to the truck. But it wasn't one of the villagers. This man was different, completely different. He wore a suit, an expensive one by the look of it, dark charcoal gray with a subtle pinstripe, perfectly tailored to his tall frame. His white shirt was crisp and bright even in the fading light, and his tie was knotted with mathematical precision. His shoes were polished leather that caught what little light remained. He looked like he'd stepped out of a boardroom in Manhattan, not a remote mountain village that time forgot. The contrast was jarring. Here was a place where people lived without electricity or modern conveniences, where they wore simple clothes and worked with their hands, and suddenly there was a man who looked like he could afford to buy and sell the entire valley. Leon stopped walking so abruptly that Jonathan nearly bumped into him. I came up beside them, all three of us standing there staring at this impossible figure. The man stood perfectly still, hands clasped behind his back, watching our approach with what looked like mild interest. Not surprise, not concern, just the patient attention of someone who had been expecting us. My first instinct was to reach for the camera, but I stopped myself. After what I'd seen through the viewfinder today, I wasn't sure I wanted to know what this man might look like through that lens. The thought of those black cracks spreading across another face, of another impossible smile stretching beyond human limits, made my stomach clench. The man was probably in his 50s, with silver hair combed back from a high forehead and pale blue eyes that seemed to take in everything without revealing anything. His face was lean and angular, with the kind of sharp features that suggested intelligence and control. There was something unsettling about his stillness, the way he stood there without fidgeting or shifting his weight, like a statue that happened to be breathing. "Gentlemen," he said, and his voice carried clearly in the evening air. It was cultured, educated, with the kind of accent that spoke of expensive schools and exclusive clubs. "I believe you're lost." It wasn't a question. He said it like he was stating a simple fact, the way someone might observe that it was getting dark or that rain was coming. I found my voice first. "I'm Jasper Miles. We're here making a documentary about this community." The words came out steady, professional, the same introduction I'd given hundreds of times to hundreds of different people. But this felt different. This felt like I was explaining myself to someone who already knew exactly who I was and why I was here. The man listened politely, his pale eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, he nodded slowly, as if he'd expected exactly that response. "A documentary," he repeated, and there was something in his tone that made the word sound almost quaint. "How interesting. And what have you discovered about our little community, Mr. Miles?" The question felt loaded, like there was a right answer and a wrong answer, and my choice would determine something important. I thought about the woman spinning invisible thread, the man chopping phantom wood, the girl on the swing with her impossible smile and void black eyes. I thought about what the camera had shown me, the reality hiding beneath the surface of this place. "They're different," I said carefully. "The people here, they do things differently." The man's mouth curved in what might have been a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Different, yes, I suppose they are." He paused, studying me with that unsettling intensity. "But I'm afraid you're not meant to be here, Mr. Miles." The words hit me like a physical blow. There was something in his voice, a certainty that made my chest tighten. This wasn't a suggestion or a request. This was a statement of fact delivered with absolute conviction. "What do you mean?" Jonathan asked, speaking for the first time since we'd encountered this strange figure. His voice was tight with tension. The man's attention shifted to Jonathan, then back to me. When he spoke again, his words made no sense, but somehow carried the weight of truth. "This place exists parallel to your world, Mr. Miles, but it isn't your world. You've stumbled into something that was never fully formed, never completely real, a copy that failed to develop properly." I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. Parallel worlds, failed copies. It sounded like science fiction, like the kind of crazy theories that conspiracy theorists posted on internet forums. But standing here in this valley where people worked with invisible tools and children played with toys that didn't exist, where my camera showed me horrors hiding behind human faces, the impossible suddenly felt possible. "I don't understand," I said, though part of me was starting to, and that part terrified me. The man's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes suggested patience, as if he was explaining something obvious to a slow student. "Understanding isn't required, Mr. Miles. Only acceptance. You've seen things today that don't align with your reality. Your camera has shown you truths that shouldn't be visible to someone from your world." My blood went cold. How could he know about the camera? About what I'd seen through the viewfinder? I hadn't told anyone, not even Jonathan, but this man spoke about it like he'd been watching, like he knew exactly what had happened when I'd filmed the girl on the swing. I felt Jonathan step closer to me, and I heard the soft whir of his camera powering up. He was getting ready to film, to document this encounter the same way we'd documented everything else today. But the man raised one hand, a simple gesture that somehow carried enormous authority. "I wouldn't recommend that," he said, his pale eyes fixed on Jonathan's camera. "Your device reveals truth that should remain hidden, and sight, as Mr. Miles has discovered, comes with consequences." The words hung in the air like a threat. Jonathan's finger hesitated over the record button, and I could see the uncertainty in his face. He was looking to me for guidance, waiting for me to tell him what to do. But I didn't know what to do. This man knew things he shouldn't know, spoke about impossible concepts as if they were everyday facts, and radiated an authority that made every instinct I had scream warnings. The camera around my neck felt heavier than ever, its weight pressing against my chest like a physical reminder of what I'd seen today. The truth that should remain hidden. The consequences of sight. I thought about the girl's face transforming through the viewfinder, about the black cracks spreading across her skin, and her smile stretching beyond human limits. Was that what he meant? Was that the price of seeing what lay beneath the surface of this place? My mind raced, trying to make sense of everything. The villagers' strange behavior, their refusal to acknowledge us, their phantom work with invisible tools, the girl on the swing with her mechanical motion and knowing smile, the way this place felt disconnected from the outside world, isolated not just by geography, but by something deeper, something fundamental, a copy that failed to develop properly. The words echoed in my head, and suddenly the pieces started fitting together in a way that made terrible sense. What if this wasn't just an isolated community with strange customs? What if it was something else entirely? Something that only looked like a normal place from the surface, but revealed its true nature to those who looked too closely. The man stood there watching me work through it, his expression patient and expectant. Like he was waiting for me to reach the conclusion he already knew I would reach. The conclusion that would change everything I thought I knew about reality. My hand moved before my brain caught up with what I was doing. The camera rose from my chest, fingers finding the familiar grip, thumb automatically switching it on. Jonathan's warning look didn't register. Leon's sharp intake of breath somewhere behind me might as well have been wind through the trees. All I could focus on was the viewfinder pressing against my eye socket, the world narrowing to that small rectangular frame. The suited man filled the center of my shot, still perfectly composed in his expensive clothes, hands clasped behind his back like he was posing for a formal portrait. His pale blue eyes looked directly into the lens with that same patient expression, as if he'd been expecting this exact moment, waiting for it even. Then his face began to change. It started with his skin. The smooth, angular features I'd been looking at with my naked eyes began to shift and bubble like wax held too close to flame. His jawline sagged and reformed, the bone structure underneath seeming to melt and reshape itself into something that had never been human. The pale blue of his eyes darkened, then split. One eye became two, then three, multiplying across his forehead and down his cheeks in a scattered pattern that made no biological sense. Each new eye blinked independently. All of them focused on me with an intelligence that felt ancient and hungry. His mouth stretched wider than any human mouth should be able to stretch, the corners tearing past where his ears should have been. Inside, rows upon rows of teeth emerged. Not the flat, grinding teeth of a person, but needle-sharp points that gleamed wet in the fading daylight. They kept coming, spiraling back into his throat like the inside of some deep-sea creature that had never seen sunlight. The sound that emerged from that impossible mouth wasn't quite a growl and wasn't quite laughter, but something that made my bones ache just hearing it. The worst part was his expression. Despite everything that was happening to his features, despite the multiplication of eyes and the horrific transformation of his mouth, he maintained that same patient, expectant look. Like this was his true face, and he was relieved to finally show it to someone who could see. My hands started shaking so violently I nearly lost my grip on the camera. The viewfinder bounced against my eye, making the image jitter and dance, but I couldn't look away, couldn't lower the camera. The thing that had been pretending to be a man tilted its head, and I heard the wet sound of flesh rearranging itself. More eyes opened along his neck, blinking in sequence like some kind of organic Morse code. Then it smiled. All those needle teeth caught the light, and every single one of its eyes crinkled at the corners with genuine amusement. I stumbled backward so hard I nearly went down. My heel caught on something, a rock, a root, didn't matter, and I windmilled my arms to keep my balance. The camera swung wildly on its strap, banging against my ribs. When I managed to steady myself and look up, the man appeared normal again. Expensive suit, silver hair, pale blue eyes. Just one pair of them. His mouth was back to human proportions, lips curved in that same slight smile he'd worn when he first appeared in our path. But I knew what I'd seen. The camera didn't lie, even when I desperately wanted it to. Jonathan. My voice came out as a croak. I cleared my throat and tried again. Jonathan, we need to leave. Right now. He was staring at me with the same concerned expression he'd been wearing all afternoon, ever since I jerked the camera away from the girl on the swing. Jasper, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Worse than a ghost. Ghosts were just dead people. This was something that had never been people at all. We need to go, I repeated, grabbing Jonathan's arm. Trust me on this. We need to get back to the truck right now. The suited man, or the thing wearing a suited man's appearance, watched our exchange with that patient expression. He hadn't moved from his position blocking the road, but somehow he seemed closer than he had been a moment ago. The shadows around him looked darker, more solid, like they were gathering at his feet. Mr. Miles, he said in that same cultured accent, I did warn you about consequences. I didn't answer, couldn't answer. Instead, I turned and started walking quickly back toward where we'd left Leon in the truck, pulling Jonathan along with me. My legs felt unsteady, like I'd been sitting too long, and the blood flow was just returning. Every step seemed to take more effort than it should have. "Jasper, slow down," Jonathan protested, but he kept pace with me. "What happened back there? What did you see?" I couldn't explain it. Wouldn't have known where to start even if I'd wanted to try. How do you tell someone that the camera reveals monsters wearing human faces? That we'd stumbled into some kind of parallel world where nothing was what it appeared to be? That the helpful stranger in the expensive suit had eyes multiplying across his skull and a mouth full of teeth designed for tearing flesh? Behind us, I could hear the man's voice carrying clearly through the evening air, even though he wasn't shouting. "You can run back to your world, Mr. Miles, but you've seen too much now. The camera has shown you truths that will follow you home." I walked faster. Jonathan had to jog to keep up. The village looked different as we passed through it again. The woman was still making her spinning motions, but now her movements seemed more frantic, more desperate. The man with the axe was swinging harder at his invisible wood, and I could swear I heard the sound of actual impacts, even though there was nothing there for the blade to strike. The children's laughter had taken on a shrill quality that made my teeth ache, and they were all watching us. Not directly, they kept their eyes focused on their phantom tasks, but I could feel their attention tracking our movement through the village like a physical weight. Every single one of them knew we were leaving. Every single one of them knew why. The house with the swing came into view, and I felt my stomach clench. The girl was back. She sat in exactly the same position as before, hands folded in her lap, feet not quite reaching the ground. The swing moved in that same perfect pendulum motion, but faster now, much faster. The ropes creaked with a rhythm that sounded almost like Morse code. As we passed the house, she turned her head to look directly at me. Not at the camera this time. I was keeping it pressed firmly against my chest. But at me. Her smile was the same gentle expression I'd seen through the LCD screen. Sweet and innocent and completely normal. But I knew what the viewfinder would show me if I looked. I knew about the cracks spreading across her skin and the teeth hiding behind that smile and the empty black holes where her eyes should be. The camera had revealed her true nature once, and I had no doubt it would do so again. I didn't look back as we left the village behind. Leon had the truck running when we reached it. The engine was idling rough, like it was eager to get moving, and Leon himself looked pale and tense behind the steering wheel. His knuckles were white where he gripped the wheel, and his eyes kept darting between us and the road behind us. "Get in," he said before we'd even reached the passenger side. "Get in right now." I didn't need to be told twice. I yanked open the tailgate and threw my camera bag into the truck bed with more force than necessary. The bag hit the metal with a solid thunk, and I heard some of my equipment rattle inside. Normally that would have made me wince. I'd spent years learning to treat my gear with the kind of care most people reserved for newborns, but right now I just wanted it out of my hands. Jonathan climbed into the passenger seat while I scrambled into the narrow space behind it. Leon had the truck in gear before I'd even gotten the door closed. We lurched forward, tires spinning briefly on the loose dirt before finding purchase. I twisted around to look back through the rear window as we pulled away. The suited man was still standing in the road where we'd left him, hands clasped behind his back, watching our retreat. He didn't wave goodbye, didn't call out any final warnings or threats. He just stood there, perfectly still, as the distance between us grew. But even as he got smaller and smaller in the rear window, he never seemed to actually move. It was like looking at a photograph that was slowly shrinking rather than watching a real person recede into the distance. His position remained exactly the same, head tilted slightly to one side, that patient smile on his lips, pale blue eyes fixed on our truck with unwavering attention. The village disappeared behind a curve in the road, taking the suited man with it. I slumped back in my seat and tried to convince my hands to stop shaking. The camera bag sat beside me in the truck bed. and I could feel its weight like a physical presence. All that footage was in there, hours of recording from a place that shouldn't exist, captured by a device that showed impossible things. Leon drove in complete silence, his attention focused entirely on navigating the increasingly rough road. Jonathan kept glancing back at me with worried eyes, but he didn't ask any more questions. Maybe he could tell I wasn't ready to answer them. Maybe he was starting to understand that whatever had happened back there was beyond normal explanation. The suited man's words echoed in my head as we descended the mountain. "You've seen too much now. The camera has shown you truths that will follow you home." I pressed my back against the truck's cab and watched the trees rush past in the gathering darkness. The camera bag sat next to me, silent and innocent looking, containing secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to understand. But I knew I'd have to look at that footage eventually. I'd have to see what else the viewfinder had captured in that place where reality wore masks and nothing was what it appeared to be. The truck bounced over a particularly rough patch of road, and my equipment rattled again inside the bag. The sound seemed unnaturally loud in the silence of our retreat, like an echo that lasted too long and carried too far. The truck cab felt smaller somehow, cramped in a way it hadn't before. I pulled my camera bag onto my lap and unzipped it with fingers that still hadn't quite stopped shaking. The memory card sat in its slot like it always did, that tiny piece of plastic that held everything we'd captured, everything that mattered. I needed to see it again. Needed proof that what I'd witnessed through that viewfinder wasn't some kind of breakdown or hallucination brought on by too much mountain air and local folklore, the girl's face splitting into impossible geometry, the suited man's flesh melting and reforming while extra eyes blinked across his forehead. It had to be there, recorded in digital certainty. Leon kept his attention on the road, navigating the ruts and stones with the same white-knuckled determination he'd shown on the way up. Jonathan sat beside him, occasionally glancing back at me with that worried expression I'd been seeing all afternoon. Neither of them spoke. The engine's rumble filled the silence, punctuated by the occasional scrape of branches against the truck's roof. I powered on the camera and flipped out the LCD screen. The familiar startup sequence ran through its paces: manufacturer logo, battery indicator, memory card status. Everything normal, everything as it should be. I pressed the playback button and waited for the first clip to load. The screen showed the standard file browser interface, date stamps running down the left side, thumbnail previews on the right, except the thumbnails were black. Every single one. I scrolled through the list, watching empty frame after empty frame scroll past. The files were there. I could see them listed with their proper timestamps and file sizes, but the preview images showed nothing but darkness. "That's weird," I muttered, selecting the first file and hitting play. The playback screen loaded, showing the standard transport controls at the bottom, but the image area remained black. Not the kind of black you get from a lens cap or an exposure problem, pure digital black, like the camera had recorded absolutely nothing. I checked the file information. Duration, 3 minutes, 47 seconds. File size, 2.3 gigabytes. The metadata indicated a normal recording session, but there was no image. I tried the next file. Same thing. Black screen, proper file size, correct duration. My hand started to feel unsteady again as I scrolled through clip after clip, finding the same impossible result every time. Hours of footage, all of it gone. Not corrupted or damaged, just empty, as if the camera had been pointed into a void for the entire day. "Jonathan," I said, my voice sounding strange in the confined space. "Can you take a look at this?" He turned in his seat, eyebrows raised with concern. "What's wrong?" I handed him the camera, LCD screen still showing the black playback window. "The footage, it's all gone." Jonathan took the camera and examined the screen, his expression shifting from concern to confusion. He navigated through the menus with practiced efficiency, checking different playback modes and file formats. His frown deepened as he worked. "This is strange," he said finally. "The files are definitely here, and they're the right size for video data, but there's no image information. It's like the camera recorded nothing." "That's impossible," I said. "We were filming for hours. You saw me recording. You were right there." Jonathan's frown deepened. He looked at the camera screen again, then back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not confusion anymore. Something else. Something that made my stomach clench. "Jasper," he said slowly. "What are you talking about? We didn't film anything today." The words hit me like cold water. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline or the explanation that would make sense of what he'd just said. But his expression remained serious, genuinely puzzled. "What do you mean we didn't film anything?" I asked. "We spent the whole afternoon in that village. You were monitoring audio levels. You saw me having problems with the viewfinder." Jonathan exchanged a glance with Leon, who was still focused on the road but clearly listening to our conversation. When Jonathan looked back at me, his expression had shifted to something approaching worry. "Jasper, we went up to the ridge so Leon could show us the view, that's it. We looked around for maybe 20 minutes, then came back down. You never took your camera out of the bag." The truck bounced over a particularly rough section of road, and I felt like the impact had knocked something loose in my head. I looked from Jonathan to Leon, searching for any sign that this was some kind of joke or misunderstanding. "Leon," I said, "tell him about the village. The woman with the spinning wheel. The girl on the swing." Leon glanced at me in the rearview mirror, his weathered face creased with confusion. "What village? There's no village up there, just wilderness. Has been for decades. You were the one who brought us there," I insisted. "You kept warning us about how the people weren't right, how they didn't act normal. You've been there before." "Jasper, I don't know what you're talking about." Leon's voice carried the patient tone people use when dealing with someone who's clearly not making sense. "I brought you up to Cascade Ridge to show you the view of the valley. That's what you asked for, scenic shots for your documentary. We never went to any village." I felt the world tilting around me, like the truck was sliding sideways even though I could see we were moving straight down the mountain road. These were the same two men who'd spent the afternoon with me. Jonathan had been right beside me, watching me film, noticing when I got shaken up by what I saw through the viewfinder. Leon had been nervous the entire time, jumping at shadows and constantly looking over his shoulder. "Jonathan, you asked me what was wrong when I jerked the camera away from the girl. You said I went pale." Jonathan shook his head slowly. "I don't remember that. You seemed a little on edge today, but you never used the camera. We just looked at the scenery and came back down." I grabbed my camera back from him and scrolled through the files again, as if repetition might somehow make the footage reappear. But the black screens remained stubbornly empty, mocking me with their digital void. The timestamps were all wrong too, I realized. According to the camera's internal clock, we'd only been recording for a few minutes total, not the hours I remembered. "This doesn't make sense," I said, more to myself than to them. "I remember everything. The woman spinning nothing, the man chopping wood that wasn't there, the children playing with invisible toys." "Jasper," Jonathan said gently, "are you feeling all right? Maybe the altitude got to you or something. You've been acting strange since we left the truck." "Since we left the truck. But we'd left the truck to walk into the village. We'd spent hours there. I had clear, vivid memories of every detail. The smell of wood smoke, the sound of the girl's swing creaking, the way the suited man's flesh had bubbled and reformed when I looked at him through the viewfinder. Those memories felt more real than the conversation I was having right now. But the evidence was staring me in the face. Empty files, no footage, and two men who had no recollection of the most significant day any of us had ever experienced. I thought about the suited man's warning, his cultured voice explaining that we'd stumbled into a place that existed parallel to our world. a copy that had failed to develop properly. He'd said there would be consequences, that the truth would follow me home. Maybe this was what he'd meant, not that the truth would pursue me, but that it would become impossible to prove, that I'd be left alone with memories that no one else could share or verify. "The suited man," I said desperately. "He was blocking the road when we tried to leave. He said we'd seen too much." Leon caught my eye in the mirror again. "Jasper, there was nobody on the road. We drove straight up and straight back down. Didn't see another soul the whole time." I slumped back against the seat, feeling the weight of isolation settling over me like a heavy blanket. The camera sat in my lap, its LCD screen still showing that damning black rectangle where hours of impossible footage should have been. Everything I'd experienced, everything I'd witnessed, had been erased not just from digital memory, but from human memory as well. The worst part was how certain they both seemed. This wasn't confusion or forgetfulness. Jonathan and Leon spoke with the absolute confidence of people recounting events that had actually happened. Their version of the day was clear and consistent, a simple trip up the mountain to look at scenery, followed by an uneventful return. My version, full of phantom activities and transforming monsters, sounded insane even to me when I tried to explain it. I closed the camera and put it back in the bag, my hands moving automatically while my mind struggled to process what was happening. The memory card that should have contained evidence of the impossible was as empty as if I'd never pressed the record button. The two witnesses who should have been able to corroborate my experience had no memory of it at all. But I remembered. Every detail remained crystal clear in my mind. The mechanical precision of the girl's swing, the wet sound of the suited man's flesh rearranging itself, the way all the villagers had tracked our movement while pretending to focus on their phantom tasks. Those memories felt solid and real in a way that made the current conversation feel like the hallucination. "Maybe we should get you checked out when we get back to town," Jonathan suggested. "You might have had some kind of episode. Altitude sickness can cause confusion, hallucinations." I nodded absently, not because I agreed, but because I didn't know what else to do. How do you argue with emptiness? How do you prove something happened when all the evidence has been wiped away? The suited man had been right about consequences. This was worse than any physical threat. Being left alone with impossible memories, watching people I trusted look at me with growing concern as I insisted on a reality they couldn't access. The truck continued its descent down the mountain road, carrying us back toward a world where today had been nothing more than a scenic drive, where villages full of people performing phantom activities didn't exist, where cameras didn't reveal hidden truths through their viewfinders, where reality remained safely predictable and documentable. But I knew what I'd seen, what I'd experienced. And as Leon navigated another sharp turn and Jonathan continued to watch me with worried eyes, I realized that knowing might be the heaviest burden of all. The truth hadn't followed me home. It had been stripped away from everyone but me, leaving me alone with memories that seemed increasingly impossible to believe. I pulled the keycard from my back pocket and slid it through the reader. The green light blinked, mechanism clicked, and I pushed into the hotel room. The door closed behind me with that hollow thud every hotel door makes, sealing me into the stale air and beige walls that looked exactly like 1,000 other rooms I'd stayed in over the years. My camera bag sat on the small desk where I'd dropped it earlier. I walked over and unzipped it, pulling out the camera body. The metal felt cold in my hands, heavier than usual. I turned it over, examining every surface like I might find some explanation etched into the black plastic. Nothing looked different. Same scratches on the bottom from years of use. Same worn spot on the grip where my thumb always rested. Same everything. I sat down hard on the edge of the bed, camera cradled in my lap. The mattress sagged under my weight, springs creaking in protest. The rational part of my mind kept trying to make sense of what had happened, or what I thought had happened. Altitude sickness could cause hallucinations. Stress could trigger psychological episodes. I'd been working too much lately, not sleeping enough, drinking too much coffee, and not enough water. But my hands started shaking again just thinking about what I'd seen through that viewfinder. The girl's face cracking like broken porcelain. Those black eyes staring into the lens. The suited man's flesh melting and reforming. All those extra eyes blinking at me from impossible places. My stomach clenched tight. Same sick feeling I'd had when I jerked the camera away from my face on that mountain road. I set the camera down on the bedspread next to me and stared at it. This thing had been my tool for 8 years. I knew every button, every menu, every quirk in its autofocus system. I'd filmed everything from city council meetings to forest fires with it. Normal things, real things, things that made sense when I played them back later. The suited man's words kept cycling through my head. Your camera has shown you truths that shouldn't be visible to someone from your world. How had he known about the camera? I'd never mentioned what I was seeing to anyone, not even Jonathan. And that phrase about parallel worlds and failed copies, what did that even mean? I stood up and walked to the window, pushing aside the heavy curtains. The parking lot spread out below me, sodium lights casting everything in orange, a few cars scattered across the asphalt. Normal late-night motel scene. Nothing strange or impossible about any of it. But I found myself wondering if I raised the camera to my eye and looked through the viewfinder, would I see something different? Would those cars transform into something else? Would the people walking to their rooms reveal hidden faces underneath? I let the curtain fall back into place and returned to the bed. The camera sat there like an accusation. I picked it up again, finger hovering over the power button. Part of me wanted to test it, to point it at something in this room and see what the viewfinder showed, but a bigger part of me was terrified of what I might discover. What if the hotel room wasn't really a hotel room? What if the person in the mirror wasn't really me? Instead, I opened the memory card compartment and pulled out the small plastic square, held it up to the lamplight like I might see the missing footage trapped inside. But it just looked like every other memory card I'd ever used. Black plastic, tiny metal contacts, nothing special about it at all. The footage had been there. I remembered filming the woman with her invisible spinning wheel, the man chopping phantom wood, the children playing with toys that didn't exist. Hours of material documenting something impossible. And now it was gone, replaced by empty black files that shouldn't exist either. Files with proper timestamps and correct file sizes, but no actual content. I slipped the memory card back into the camera and closed the compartment. Jonathan and Leon had no memory of any of it. To them, we'd taken a simple trip to Cascade Ridge, looked at some scenic views, and came back. 20 minutes total. No village, no strange people, no suited man blocking the road. Just a normal afternoon that ended with me acting confused and upset for no reason they could understand. But I remembered every detail. The way the woman's fingers moved like she was handling real thread. The sound of the girl's swing creaking in that perfect rhythm. The smell of wood smoke mixed with something earthy and organic I couldn't identify. The temperature drop when we entered the valley. The feeling of being watched by people who pretended not to see us. I remembered the fear, too. The way my skin crawled when the girl smiled at me through the camera. The sick dread that built in my stomach as I realized the viewfinder was showing me something different from what my naked eyes could see. The absolute terror when the suited man's face started melting and reforming. All those extra eyes opening along his neck and forehead. None of it felt like a hallucination. Hallucinations were supposed to be vague, dreamlike, hard to pin down. This had been sharp and clear and brutally real. More real than this hotel room. More real than the conversation in the truck afterward where Jonathan and Leon insisted nothing had happened. I thought about the suited man's explanation. A copy that failed to develop properly. A place that existed parallel to our world but wasn't our world. What if that was actually true? What if there were places where reality worked differently, where the normal rules didn't apply? What if my camera somehow let me see through the barriers between those places? But why me? Why my camera? I'd been filming for years and never seen anything like this before. What was different about that valley? What was different about that day? I got up and walked to the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and looked at myself in the mirror. Same face I'd had for 42 years. Tired eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Graying hair that needed a trim. Nothing unusual. Nothing that suggested I was the kind of person who could see into parallel dimensions, or whatever that place had been. When I came back to the bed, the camera was exactly where I'd left it. I sat down and picked it up again, turning it over in my hands. The weight felt different now. Not heavier exactly, but more significant. Like it was carrying something invisible that hadn't been there before. The suited man had warned me about consequences. He'd said the truth would follow me home. At first, I'd thought he meant the creatures would come after me, but now I understood what he really meant. The consequence wasn't pursuit. It was isolation. Being the only person who remembered something that everyone else had forgotten or never experienced in the first place. I was alone with this knowledge. Alone with memories that I couldn't prove, couldn't share, couldn't make sense of. Jonathan thought I needed medical attention. Leon had looked at me like I was losing my mind. And maybe I was. Maybe that was the simpler explanation. But the fear was still there, coiled tight in my chest every time I thought about raising the camera to my eye. That wasn't the fear of mental illness. That was the fear of seeing something real that I wasn't supposed to see. Something that existed in the spaces between normal reality, in the cracks where one world bled through into another. I set the camera on the nightstand and lay back on the bed, staring up at the popcorn ceiling. The air conditioning unit hummed in the corner, cycling on and off with mechanical precision. The sound reminded me of the girl's swing, that perfect rhythm that had gone on too long to be natural. I closed my eyes, but that made it worse. Behind my eyelids, I could see those black cracks spreading across the girl's cheeks again, the way her smile had stretched beyond human limits, the rows of needle teeth spiraling down into the suited man's throat like something from the deep ocean. My eyes snapped open. The ceiling looked normal, white-textured plaster with a few water stains near the corner, no hidden faces peering down at me, no extra eyes blinking in the shadows. Just a regular hotel room ceiling in a regular hotel in a regular town. I sat up and reached for the camera again. My hands were steadier now, the initial shock wearing off into something more manageable. I powered it on and navigated to the playback menu. The files were still there, black thumbnails with proper timestamps. I selected the first one and hit play. Pure digital black filled the LCD screen. No image, no movement, nothing. But the time code was running, showing the file was playing back properly. According to the metadata, this clip was 43 minutes long. I remembered filming the woman with the spinning wheel for at least that long, watching her fingers work around invisible thread while she tracked our movement through the village. I fast-forwarded through the file, hoping to catch a frame of actual content. Nothing. Just black from beginning to end. I tried the next file, then the next. Same result every time. The camera had recorded something. The file sizes proved that. But whatever it captured wasn't visible anymore. I thought about the suited man's impossible knowledge of what I'd seen. He'd known about the camera revealing hidden truths before I told anyone. He'd known I was seeing something different through the viewfinder. How was that possible unless he was connected to whatever force had erased the footage? The explanation about parallel worlds kept coming back to me. A copy that failed to develop properly. What if that village existed in some kind of dimensional overlap, a place where two realities intersected? What if my camera had somehow captured images from both worlds at once, and now the normal world was reasserting itself by erasing the impossible footage. I scrolled through the camera's other settings, looking for anything unusual. The date and time were correct. The image quality settings were normal. Battery level showed 3/4 full. Everything appeared exactly as it should. No evidence that anything extraordinary had happened. But the memory card contained gigabytes of nothing. Files that existed but showed only darkness. That wasn't normal camera behavior. Memory cards didn't spontaneously corrupt in such a specific way, creating properly formatted files with no content. This was something else entirely. I powered off the camera and set it aside. The rational explanations weren't working anymore. Altitude sickness didn't create false memories with this level of detail. Psychological breaks didn't generate shared experiences that other people forgot afterward. Equipment malfunctions didn't produce impossible file structures. Something had happened in that valley. Something that existed outside normal reality. And somehow my camera had been able to see it while my naked eyes saw only the surface layer. I got up and walked to my equipment bag, pulling out my laptop. If the camera files were corrupted or hidden, maybe I could recover them with data recovery software. I connected the camera to the laptop via USB cable and waited for it to mount as an external drive. The folder structure looked normal. DCIM directory, numbered subfolders, the usual camera organization. I navigated to today's files and found them listed with proper names and sizes. But when I tried to open them in video editing software, I got error messages, unsupported format, corrupted data, file cannot be read. I tried copying the files to the laptop's hard drive. The transfer appeared to work, showing progress bars and completion messages. But when I checked the copied files, they were empty. 0 bytes each. The original files on the camera still showed their full sizes, but the copies contained nothing. That was impossible. File corruption didn't work that way. Either a file was readable, or it wasn't. You couldn't have files that appeared intact but copied as empty data. This was something beyond normal technical failure. I disconnected the camera and closed the laptop. Whatever force had erased Jonathan and Leon's memories was also protecting itself by making the footage inaccessible. The suited man had warned about consequences, and this was part of it. The evidence would remain forever out of reach, leaving me with nothing but memories that sounded like delusions when I tried to share them. I lay back down on the bed, exhaustion finally catching up with me. The digital clock on the nightstand showed 11:47. I'd been in this room for over 3 hours, trying to make sense of something that defied explanation. Tomorrow I'd have to pack up and drive home, return to my normal life, pretend this never happened. But I knew I'd never be able to look through a camera viewfinder the same way again. Every time I raised it to my eye, I'd wonder what hidden reality might be lurking just beneath the surface. What other parallel worlds existed in the spaces between normal perception? What other failed copies were scattered across the landscape, waiting for someone with the right kind of sight to stumble into them? The camera sat on the nightstand like a loaded weapon. I'd brought it here to document a simple human interest story about an isolated community. Instead, I discovered something that challenged everything I thought I knew about the nature of reality itself. And I was the only one who remembered it. The weight of that isolation pressed down on me as I closed my eyes and tried to sleep. Tomorrow, I'd drive home to my apartment, my editing equipment, my normal life. But I'd be carrying this knowledge with me forever, unable to prove it, unable to share it, unable to forget it. The air conditioning cycled off, leaving the room in perfect silence. In that quiet, I could almost hear the echo of a child's swing creaking in an impossible rhythm, the sound of phantom axes hitting non-existent wood, the wet noise of flesh rearranging itself into forms that shouldn't exist. I pulled the pillow over my head, but the memories followed me down into an uneasy sleep. The mountains had become strangers to me. 3 months had passed since that day, or what I believed was that day, and I hadn't gone back. Not once. I'd driven past the turnoff to the old logging road maybe a dozen times, heading to other locations for other projects, and each time I'd felt my hands tighten on the steering wheel. The GPS would chirp about available routes, and I'd keep driving straight, eyes fixed on the asphalt ahead. My documentary work had become a series of false starts and abandoned concepts. I'd sit in coffee shops with potential subjects, listening to their stories about local history or community traditions, and find myself nodding along while my mind wandered to impossible places. A woman in Bend told me about her grandmother's quilting circle, how they'd preserved techniques from the 1800s, and all I could think about was phantom spinning wheels and invisible thread. A rancher near Sisters wanted to discuss water rights and generational land use, but I kept picturing that man with his axe, swinging at nothing, the blade stopping just short of wood that wasn't there. The camera sat in my bedroom closet now, pushed back behind old coats and boxes of tax documents. I'd moved it there after the first week back home, when I'd catch myself looking at it on the desk and feeling that familiar weight in my stomach. The memory card was still inside, still holding those impossible files. Proper timestamps, correct file sizes, pure digital black when played. I'd checked them one more time the day after I got back, just to be certain, and they remained exactly as they'd been in the hotel room. Evidence of nothing, proof of everything. Jonathan had called twice in the first month, professional calls, asking about upcoming projects, wondering if I was feeling better after what he kept referring to as my episode on the mountain. He spoke to me with the careful tone people use around someone who might be fragile, someone who'd had a breakdown they were too polite to acknowledge directly. I'd given him standard responses about taking some time off, reassessing priorities, maybe shifting focus to different types of subjects. He'd accepted this readily enough. Documentary filmmakers were known for their eccentricities, their sudden pivots and creative crises. Leon had been easier to avoid entirely. I had no reason to contact him, and he had none to contact me. In his memory, we'd taken a simple trip to Cascade Ridge, spent 20 minutes looking at views, and driven back. A routine job, forgettable and unremarkable. Sometimes I wondered what he thought when he passed that logging road, if anything at all registered in his mind. Did some buried part of him remember the tension in his shoulders, the white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel, the way he'd had the engine running before we reached the truck? Or had even those physical memories been smoothed away, leaving nothing but the sanitized version where nothing unusual had ever happened? The worst part wasn't the isolation, though that was considerable. The worst part was how the experience had changed the texture of everything else. I'd always been someone who trusted his eyes, who believed in the reliability of observation and documentation. That confidence was gone now. Walking through grocery stores, I'd find myself studying other shoppers, wondering what my camera might reveal if I raised it to my eye. Sitting in restaurants, I'd watch servers moving between tables and feel an uncomfortable uncertainty about the nature of their movements, the reality of their tasks. I'd started having dreams about the village, vivid and detailed dreams that felt more like memories than unconscious fabrications. In these dreams, I walked those dirt roads again, past the wooden buildings with their fresh repairs and careful maintenance. I watched the woman at her spinning wheel, fingers moving with practiced precision around empty air, and understood somehow that she'd been doing this for decades, perfecting motions for work that would never be completed. I saw the children in their play area, laughing and running in patterns that made sense only to them, chasing invisible objects with rules I couldn't comprehend. The girl on the swing appeared in every dream, always in the same position, always with that same gentle pendulum motion. In the dreams, I never raised the camera to look at her through the viewfinder. I'd learned that lesson, but I'd watch her from a distance, noting the precise rhythm of her movement, the way her feet never quite touched the ground, the soft humming that seemed to carry farther than it should. Sometimes, in the dreams, she'd turn to look at me directly, not through a lens, but with her own eyes meeting mine, and her smile would be knowing and patient, as if she understood exactly why I was there and what I was trying to understand. I'd wake from these dreams with perfect recall of every detail, every conversation, every sensory impression. The wood smoke smell would linger in my nostrils for minutes after waking. I could feel the cooler mountain air on my skin, hear the echo of children's laughter bouncing off valley walls. These weren't the fuzzy, half-remembered fragments that normal dreams became upon waking. They had the crystalline clarity of lived experience, as sharp and immediate as my actual memories of that day. If it had been a day, if those events had actually occurred. The suited man haunted my thoughts more than the rest. His warning about consequences had been delivered with such certainty, such calm authority, that I found myself cataloging every minor inconvenience in my life, wondering if it represented some form of cosmic payment. A delayed check from a client became potential supernatural retribution. A parking ticket felt like evidence of reality adjusting itself around me. I knew this was probably paranoia, the mind's attempt to find patterns in randomness, but the knowledge didn't make the feeling go away. I'd researched the area obsessively in those first weeks, spending hours online looking for any reference to a village or community in that specific location. Historical records, geological surveys, property deeds, census data. I'd found exactly what I'd found before. Nothing recent, nothing that suggested current habitation, nothing that matched what I remembered experiencing. The 1800s property records showed scattered homesteads, but nothing resembling a permanent settlement. The 1930s census had counted maybe a dozen families in the entire valley system, and even those had been gone by the 1950s. I'd considered hiring a helicopter, paying for aerial photography of the area, but something always stopped me. Maybe it was fear of what I might see, or fear of what I might not see. Maybe it was the suited man's warning echoing in my mind, the suggestion that I'd already seen too much, crossed boundaries that weren't meant to be crossed. Or maybe it was simply the knowledge that whatever existed in that place operated by rules I didn't understand, rules that could make entire experiences disappear from memory and evidence vanish from recording devices. The camera equipment industry had moved on without me. New models had been released, new technologies developed, new techniques pioneered by filmmakers who weren't paralyzed by questions about the nature of observation itself. I'd gotten emails about trade shows and product demonstrations, invitations to preview screenings and industry networking events. I deleted them all without reading past the subject lines. The idea of picking up a camera again, of looking through a viewfinder and trusting what I saw there, felt impossible. My bank account was slowly draining. Documentary work had never been particularly lucrative, and 3 months without income was starting to show in my monthly statements. I'd need to take on some projects soon, something simple and straightforward that wouldn't require too much faith in the reliability of recorded reality. Maybe corporate videos, wedding documentation, real estate photography, work that stayed firmly grounded in the mundane and verifiable. But even those possibilities felt complicated now. How could I film a wedding ceremony and trust that what I was recording matched what was actually happening? How could I document a corporate event without wondering what hidden reality might be lurking beneath the surface of professional smiles and conference room presentations? The suited man had called it a failed copy, a parallel space that had developed improperly. But how could I be certain that our world, the one I'd always considered real and solid, wasn't just another copy with its own hidden failures and distortions? Late at night, when the house was quiet and my mind was too active for sleep, I'd find myself thinking about other people who might have stumbled into that space. The suited man had known about my camera, had understood its ability to reveal hidden truths, which suggested this wasn't the first time someone had arrived with recording equipment. How many others had made that same journey down the deteriorating mountain road? How many had encountered the woman with her invisible spinning wheel, the man with his phantom axe, the girl on her endless swing? More troubling was the question of what had happened to those other visitors. I'd escaped, if escape was the right word for carrying impossible memories back to a world that couldn't verify them. But maybe others hadn't been so fortunate. Maybe some had stayed too long, seen too much, crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed. Maybe some had never made it back at all, becoming part of that failed copy, adding their own phantom activities to the village's collection of incomplete tasks and impossible routines. The suited man's appearance had been the most unsettling element of the entire experience. The villagers, strange as they were, had seemed genuinely focused on their phantom work, absorbed in their invisible tasks with the dedication of people who believed completely in what they were doing. But the suited man had been different, aware, calculating, deliberately positioned to intercept us before we could leave. His knowledge of our presence, his understanding of the camera's capabilities, his warnings about consequences, all of it suggested a level of consciousness and purpose that went beyond the villagers' simple, repetitive behaviors. I'd started wondering if he was some kind of guardian or administrator for that space, someone responsible for managing the boundaries between their failed copy and our supposedly real world. His expensive clothing, his educated speech patterns, his calm authority, none of it fit with the rustic, isolated village where we'd encountered him. He'd seemed like someone from our world who'd been assigned to monitor and control access to theirs. Someone who understood both realities and the dangers of allowing them to intersect. The weight of carrying this knowledge alone had become a constant presence in my life, like background noise that never quite faded. I'd catch myself starting to mention it in casual conversations, then stopping abruptly when I remembered that no one would believe me, that the story would only serve to make people worried about my mental state. Friends had begun asking if I was feeling all right, commenting on my distracted behavior, my tendency to drift off mid-conversation. I'd developed standard responses about work stress and creative blocks, explanations that satisfied their concern without revealing the true source of my preoccupation. The camera remained in the closet, pushed back behind winter coats I wouldn't need for months. Sometimes I'd open the closet door for some mundane reason, looking for a jacket or retrieving a box, and I'd see it there in the shadows. The familiar black case with its worn corners and travel stickers from projects that now felt like they'd been completed by someone else entirely. I'd close the door quickly, but the image would stay with me for hours afterward, a reminder of mysteries too dangerous to pursue and truths too strange to share.